streaming. Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Monday, Labor Day at 6:01 Eastern Time on September the 3rd. And we've got two tropical storms out in the Atlantic Basin. And just think a week or so ago, some of the tropical storm fans out there were sort of wringing their hands, wondering that the whole season was not going to occur, and that was not going to happen, folks. It was clear that at some point we were going to see a burst of activity, and that's what we're seeing. In fact, the burst that resulted in Tropical Storm Gordon came fairly quickly, and that's something that, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of need to pay attention to, because it might be at least an indicator that conditions are aloft or perhaps more favorable than what weather models have been showing. Certainly weather models have been having trouble with Tropical Storm Gordon from the get-go, going back to last week when it first showed up on some of the longer range models. But nonetheless, there are a few things that I want to go through before we get started. So I'm going to do them right off the top. First off, with regards to any tropical storms and hurricanes, do not use any of the maps that you see here for any kind of decision making. If you are in the area where there is a hurricane warning up, and we're talking about the Alabama and Mississippi Gulf Coast, please consult your local officials or the National Hurricane Center's website at nhc.noaa.gov. It's very important that you go to your government resources regarding what you should or shouldn't do, and not rely on maps you might see or on anything that I say, because I can't really be specific to your particular area. Also, any radars that you see or satellite pictures, they are as close to real time as you can be at the time of this live stream. But if you're watching this on a video replay, obviously they're going to be dated. So you want to make sure you check for the latest on the satellites and radars, and you can do that by going to weather.gov and going to your local National Weather Service forecast page. Also, some of the weather maps you see on here are courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com. It's a great weather website for those of you who are weather enthusiasts, and I recommend it highly, and we appreciate the fact that we can share these maps here. That's tropicaltidbits.com. Now, let's start off with Gordon, because that is really front and center. Obviously, that is the system that is sitting right over us, that's impacting us now. And we'll start with the satellite view tonight. It's really interesting how sometimes these systems can be around forever and for days and days. I was going to say forever and ever, but I'm meaning for days and days and days, and nothing happens, very disorganized. And then as soon as you shut off the strong upper air winds, which started yesterday, we began noticing on the satellite the satellite presentation was improving. It was clear that the system was beginning to organize. The upper air winds were relaxing, and as a result, we saw this system get its act together. And we, this morning, found ourselves with a tropical storm. Now, when you look at this satellite loop, you have Gordon on the right. The cloud presentation on the GO-16, to me, looks very good. It is continuing to improve. We're seeing a gradual expansion of the convection on the west side, where it's been kind of lacking, and this is definitely organizing and probably has some time to gain strength. And the fact that it has strengthened faster than any weather model showed that I saw is probably a sign that this thing may have an opportunity to to strengthen to minimal hurricane. The conditions aloft are favorable. They're not like they were under Harvey or for Irma or for Maria, in the sense that you have these sort of ideal upper air conditions that would cause this thing to strengthen very, very rapidly, that you suddenly find yourself with a major hurricane staring at you. I think there's time for that. If you would have to see this system deepen at a rapid rate from here at 1,006 millibars, and let's say it doesn't make landfall for another 36 hours. Okay, at a millibar an hour, you're talking a deepening of 36 millibars to take it down to about 970. I mean, that would be a Category 1, Category 2 hurricane. You really would have to start to see that happening now, and I don't know that we're going to see that sort of steady, consistent strengthening through the next 36-hour period. But I certainly think that this could make it to a Category 1 status, and it is something that we're going to have to watch closely. The water temperatures there in the Gulf of Mexico are at the warmest they are for the season. They're up at around 30 degrees Celsius or 86 Fahrenheit. That is certainly warm enough to sustain a major hurricane. You also, if you look back in Texas, you see the clouds that are there. There's an upper low that's in eastern Texas, and there's also the back edge of the upper high that extends down through the Tennessee Valley and into the central Gulf states. The clouds that are on the eastern end that are from Louisiana are moving north to south, so there's a little bit of northerly shear going on in the central and eastern Gulf of Mexico. It may relax some, and I think that is one of the reasons why we're thinking that this system could certainly strengthen. But it's a little bit on the complex side what's going on in the Gulf. It's not the most ideal outflow situation for this hurricane, but it is something that would be conducive for further strengthening. Now, the other thing that I picked up on today, and we can take a look at this on the Tampa Bay Radar, the signature on the radar actually is rather impressive. This is the current radar, and you can see that hook that is to the west of Fort Myers. That is the center of Gordon, which now looks like it's moving on a general west-northwest course and will continue to move out into the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The banding of the rain to the east looks like that is not as the rain area is not as extensive as it was earlier. I mean, there is still plenty of rain going on, but you're getting more of these banding features showing up. So this is a sign that we have a system that's probably trying to organize further. And as soon as you have to be impressed with this, if only because of the fact that the center of circulation kind of hugged the coast for much of the day today, and a chunk of the circulation was over the Florida landmass, and yet it was still able to strengthen. By the way, this is not unusual, okay? A couple of people have mentioned that to me, and I did see one comment about that. There have been storms in the past that have done this in Florida. The reason why they can actually pull this off over Florida, particularly in South Florida, the complete lack of elevation, for one thing. Second, even though the center of circulation might be over land, it's barely over land, and there's a large chunk of the circulation. You have part of it that's out already in the Gulf of Mexico, and part of it is out over the Atlantic Ocean. So it is, oftentimes when hurricanes move into Florida, they weaken slowly because of the fact that their circulations may be partially over one or both of the major waterways, being the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. So there's nothing, sinister here. Let's put it that way, because I think that's where it all winds up going to eventually. All this orchestration nonsense. But let's leave it at that. But again, I'm kind of impressed by the way the signature here on the radar. So I'm tending to think that this thing is probably going to start to strengthen. It's going to strengthen further once it pulls away a bit more from the Florida coast. And here's the wide view, by the way, on the regional radar. The northern bands of the rain have moved now north of Tampa St. Pete and on up into parts of northwestern Florida. There's actually some pretty heavy downpours going on along the Florida panhandle with some pretty hefty thunderstorms there showing up on the radar this evening. But you can see how the echoes are actually translating toward the west-northwest, and you're going to get this thing out into the open waters. And it's taking this kind of diagonal track from where it is now to the mouth of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the mouth of the Pearl River. So we're talking here about 450 miles. So that's a fair enough distance. Moving at about 13, 14 miles an hour, you're talking about 36 to 40 hours before landfall. So there is certainly time here for this system to get a little bit more intense. Here's the 5 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center. So if you're plotting on a map, it's at 26.2, 82.6. Top winds are 50 miles an hour, actually moving west-northwest at 17. Again, looking at about a 36-hour time frame before the next landfall, which the Hurricane Center has as a hurricane right on the Mississippi Gulf Coast there, probably near Biloxi, Gulfport, somewhere in there, along about Wednesday morning, 2 a.m., and then continuing to move on to the northwest. I don't think, because a couple of people have asked, and I can understand that, with those of you who lived in southeast Texas and dealing with Harvey from last year, that upper low that is sitting in East Texas is kind of protecting you from this thing coming straight westward or north of due west to a point where it crosses the whole Gulf. I don't think that's going to happen with that system there. There's actually a trough in the upper atmosphere across New Mexico and into West Texas. So that really prevents this system from getting that far to the left. I think it's going to do this sort of consistent move on the underside of the ridge that is now sitting in along the East Coast. And here's the other view. If you want to use this as the interactive National Hurricane Center map, and we'll put I'll first put the 34 knot winds, and then we'll put the 50, and here's the 64 knot wind. So this is the probability of 64 knot winds going forward, assuming that this does strengthen into a hurricane. So as far as the arrival times here, the most likely time of arrival of gales would be along the Mississippi Gulf Coast and maybe to southeast Louisiana, talking at about 8 p.m. The area in red is the hurricane warning, which looks like it goes from just east of New Orleans to just about the Florida-Alabama border. And you've got tropical storm warnings up for southeastern Louisiana and a small portion of the western part of the Florida Panhandle. So except for the fact that this system is organized, it seems to be behaving as far as the strengthening track is the strengthening pattern is concerned. It's doing what it's supposed to do. And if you look at the spaghetti plots, as I saw a special request for it, and as you can see on the corner here of this, it says do not use for decision making, seek official information. But what we can say is if you notice that except for one outlier that brings it ashore on the Florida Panhandle, all the other hurricane track models are very tightly clustered from just east of the furthest west, being on the eastern shore of Lake Pontchartrain to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. They're all very, very tightly clustered there, and even in terms of speed, they're kind of along the same. They're all on the same time frame. So we're really feeling pretty good with regards to where we think this is going to wind up. Now, the one thing I want to show you, by the way, before we even go on a little further, here are the strengthening models, and not all of them, by the way, bring this up to a hurricane. A few of them do, minimal, and for only a very short time, because then we have landfall, and then they all, I don't know what the top two models, why they're doing this, where they're kind of holding it, but I'd have to see what kind of, the reasoning behind it. But again, the vast majority after that, supportive of the idea that the system is going to be moving inland. Rains are going to be a big deal with this, obviously, and some of the rainfall amounts are definitely going to be excessive when this is all said and done. Now, I want to go to the weather models here, and then we're going to switch over to Tropical Storm Francis, which is its own little Francis. I keep saying that. Florence. Somebody put the bug in my head talking about Hurricane Jean and Hurricane Francis, that were storms that were out in the Atlantic that wound up buckling back westward and went over Florida. I cannot get it out of my head. It's Tropical Storm Florence. Okay, so here's your upper air. Ridge in the east, trough in the west. And by the way, that little circle that you see off the Florida coast is the representation of Tropical Storm Gordon. And it's basically riding the western edge of the upper high. That's really all it's doing. And then the trough that's out in the west extends into West Texas. And again, it's creating a southeast flow across the whole Gulf of Mexico. It really this ridge would really have to strengthen in a big way and shift sharply westward in a very, very short period of time in order to force this system, Gordon, to go further west. I don't see that happening. If anything, you can see that the ridge actually pulls up and ever so slightly weakens here in the east, and that allows a bit of a back door to try to come down on Wednesday, which is going to fall apart for my neck of the woods. But you see where the opening is, that circle that's over Louisiana, that closed height, that is the representation of Gordon. It's just basically riding around the periphery of that high, and that ridge is going to eventually break down to some degree as we go into next weekend. And there's a trough. If you take a look here on the GFS, the new GFS, there is a trough that is swinging through southeastern Canada. And I mention this because this is going to be a key player with regards to Tropical Storm Florence, which we're going to shift to now and take a look at what the situation is with Florence. So at this point, this is going to be where I'm going to have to talk and do something here at the same time, because I got to switch maps around, and that's going to just take me a minute or two. But we're going to take a look. We're going to take a look and start with the GFS for Monday, starting for today. So this is the representation of the GFS with regards to her, Tropical Storm Florence. Top winds in Florence right now, 70 miles an hour, and it has actually strengthened a bit today. There's the wind shear situation there is reasonable, and the ocean water temperatures are a little warmer. They're not super warm, but they're warm enough to sustain a strong tropical storm. Among the two important factors in terms of where this is going in the long term is how strong does it get in the next several days? Because if it's a stronger system, it is going to respond to the steering at the higher levels of the atmosphere, which would make it more likely for it to recurve well before it reaches the east coast of the United States. And the other issue, of course, being the is the GFS, which is still trying to show a strong shortwave trough moving through southeastern Canada and out into the North Atlantic, which is showing it to be stronger, and a weaker ridge along the east coast than the other models are showing. So those are really the two important variables. We still see the GFS holding on to a tropical storm strength system here, but it is stronger than what the other models show. We are now at 96 hours, which is Friday, kind of sitting out here, edging toward the north at this point. Now, I want you to notice that here at this point, we have a pressure being shown of 957 millibars, okay? This is for next Sunday. So it actually is showing a strong Category 2, Category 3 hurricane. We have high pressure, strong high pressure building to the north in eastern Maine, a low in the Great Lakes with a trailing cold front, a system that's southeast of Greenland with a trailing front there. So the upper trough, the first upper trough looks like it bypasses it. But the GFS has a very, very rather strong, almost major hurricane here at 138 hours, which is 12Z Sunday. Now, this is as far as I have of the new run. I want to go to the European. Look at the European. The European still has just a tropical storm here with a pressure of 999. It has a much weaker system. And the reason why this is important is, again, if it's a weaker system, it's going to respond to the low-level winds, the lower-level winds, which are going to be mainly from east to west, as opposed to the upper-level winds, which may be more southwest to northeast. And as a result, the European took it from here and took it on today's run almost straight westward toward the end of the period. Notice, by the way, that the European actually has 4 systems in play here going into next week. If it's off the southeast coast, I don't know that it's going to be. Again, this is for illustrative purposes only. This is the model's view, and we don't know that this is going to be correct. But it does explain the variable here. What really is going on in the upper atmosphere and what we have to look for. You've got that system off the southeast, another one approaching the leewards, one to the west of that, and yet a 4th system south of the Cabo Verde Islands. So regardless, it seems that the European is saying whatever happens, it's going to be a busy next couple of weeks with a parade of storms. Now, let's look at the upper air on the European, because here's the big here's one of the astounding differences with regards to how the European handles things and how the GFS does. Okay, so they both have this trough coming into the eastern part of the United States. Into the southeastern Canada. There's no argument there. You've got a ridge from the Azores westward. There's a bit of a weakness, and then you've got the other upper high just along the Carolina coast. So the circle with that little blue shaded area there is the representation of Florence. Now, that weakness opens up a bit, but perhaps not enough. Just to the north, about 300 miles to the north of Florence, you're seeing westerly winds, the southern belt of the southern edge of the westerly winds in the upper atmosphere moving across the Atlantic. This is sitting just south of that. This is at next Sunday, and then after that, that trough is already just about going by, and the ridge off the Atlantic coast is beginning to build again. So Florence responds to that building ridge and begins to move toward the west. Now, the GFS, here is a huge difference here. Going to the GFS, instead of a ridge, you've got a much, much flatter ridge and actually a shortwave trough at the same time that the European has a ridge there in the eastern part of the United States. What represents Florence is sitting in between the two ridges. There are your westerlies. This is the new GFS. The old one took it up and out. I don't have it out far enough to see if the new one does, but that trough is beginning to bypass it. So the question is the GFS right about the ridge off the southeast coast being much flatter and the jet stream in Canada being much stronger? Because if it is, this would probably wind up going up and out. But you've got to wonder, because the GFS for so long now, in the last several weeks, every time it has tried to show some kind of shortwave coming into the northeastern part of the United States, it has overdone it. And you have to wonder whether it's overdoing it again, and that the ridge is going to be a much stronger feature here. So let's bear that in mind, that there is a whole lot for us to get through before we get to this point. And here by the way, we're out to Monday, Monday morning. The GFS has what would be Florence at about 31.9, almost 32 degrees north, actually about 31.5, and about 57.5, okay? And the European has the representation more like at 28, I'm just going to guess here, just about 30 north and almost to 61.7 west. So it's well south and west of the GFS, and it's mainly because of the fact that the European does not have as strong a system, not nearly as strong. Remember, I told you the GFS has a ridiculously low pressure here. Look at that, 932. It has a Category 4 hurricane sitting out in the Atlantic to the east of Bermuda. And, looking at that surface, I can tell you that, there's a front that's coming into the east here. So the high that's to the north of this would give way. This would go up, probably go up and out. The way I'm looking at this, it's just a guess because I don't have it out far enough. Now, let's bring up some satellite views here. I'm going to load those up. We're going to take a look at. We'll go on a wide shot first, and you can see there is. Florence. The circulation of Florence is actually quite large. It is much bigger than any of the storms we've seen so far this year. It extends over about seven or so degrees from south to north. And if you look at the cloud structure, it's really impacting the circulation over a large part of the Atlantic. To the west of Florence, notice the clouds from the northeastern leeward part of the leewards, from the just northeast of the leewards, out into the Atlantic for several hundred miles. There's an upper trough there. It's producing some strong winds in the upper atmosphere. This is the area of wind shear that stands in the way. The GFS, for some reason, doesn't seem to be recognizing this. It's because it strengthens this to a major hurricane, in spite of the fact that what we see on the satellite is telling us that there's something there that will prevent that from happening. And the European, the UCMET also, by the way, pick up on this. This should prevent this from strengthening, and that sets the table for the European scenario of the more westerly track. So, and the Canadian, by the way, is very similar to the European. It's a little further east than the European, but it has the same idea, and one of these models is going to wind up being desperately wrong, obviously, with regards to both the fact of what's going on in the central Atlantic and whether this winds up recurving or not recurving. But the satellite presentation with regards to Florence is actually rather impressive. It's gotten better organized since yesterday, when it did develop a bit of a disheveled look, as the Hurricane Center described it. But it does look, the satellite presentation has definitely improved today, and based on the satellite estimates, top winds are about 70 miles an hour. There is also a tropical wave that has come off the African coast. I can, courtesy of Tropical Tidbits, we can actually pull up, I'll pull up the east. We're still, by the way, after these many days with Florence being around, we're still able to look at this from the standpoint of the Eastern Atlantic satellite view. You can see Florence has developed, these colder cloud tops here of minus 70 suddenly developed during the day today. There was a warming of the tops earlier, and now they've gotten colder. Usually a sign that that is a sign of some strengthening. Also, I can kind of see the beginnings of a little bit of turning, ever so, just a little bit perhaps at mid levels, with this tropical wave that's south of the Cabo Verde Islands along about 10 degrees north latitude. The Hurricane Center, by the way, does rate that as right now as a 30% chance of tropical storm development. I'm going to also, we're going to go to, where is that shot? We can take a look at Gordon, by the way. So we'll switch back to Gordon, and we'll look at it on the long wave satellite here with the enhancement. And you can see that northern band that's running up through North Florida. There's a bit of a break, but that core of colder cloud tops sitting off the Florida coast, east of Port Charlotte. The center is to the east. I'm sorry, I keep saying to the west of Port Charlotte. Okay, the center is offshore and moving west-northwestward. Once this gets out a little bit further into the Gulf, I think you're going to see an increase in strength. I do want to check, by the way, from Tropical Tidbits, because if you go to Aircraft Recon, you can actually see the reconnaissance mission. There's a new mission going into Gordon, but it's not far enough south. It's not quite there yet. It's at 27.7 and 84.7, so there's a little bit of ways to go before it gets into the center. But I can show you from the earlier mission today, there were 2 passes into the center, and we had a 4 millibar drop in the pressure from the first pass to the second pass, and that yellow there winds of 45 to 50 knots as measured by the reconnaissance aircraft. So we'll have to wait and see what the plane shows us going forward here with its current mission. Do we have a little bit more of the GFS? Let's see. Well, see, now it's moving northwest at this point, but we're only at 180 hours. I can't. I'm sorry, but I can't accept that there's going to be a 933 very strong Category 4 hurricane in that position. I would accept it if all three models were within 20 millibars of that number, but we're not even close. The Europeans not even close to that. So and given this is not last year where we had these things all run to Category 5s. Okay, we haven't seen we haven't seen our first major hurricane yet. Last year at this time, we've already would have gone through Harvey, and we're revving up Hurricane Irma. So to me, that just seems drastically overdone, and I just don't think that that's going to be the case. That you're going to see something that intense out there. And we look at the upper air. Now you see the upper air. You do have two upper highs on either side. To the north on the GFS, you have a west-southwest wind from off the New Jersey coast out to the central Atlantic before it drops southeastward around an upper low that forms just west of the Azores. So the question is this upper high going to build around this or not? And you've got another shortwave trough on the GFS that is going to be different than what the European has. See, this to me looks like it's going to split the ridge and go up and out. If you go to the Europeans' upper air, it's totally different. Look at the difference in the upper high. It's so much stronger. There's no shortwave trough across Canada. If you've got southeastern Canada, you've got a ridge that's building from off the Virginia coast north and west into the Great Lakes. This is different, okay? And one of these models is wrong about something. It's actually one of the they may be wrong about a few things. So I can't. There's no way at this point. Obviously, there's no way at this point to figure out what's going to come of all this. But it certainly is a very interesting weather dilemma that we have. Now let's now at this point at least examine what the short-term weather is going to be across the United States this week, because you still have this disgusting heat and humidity that's going on in the Northeast that started up again today. Now, I mentioned that there actually is a bit of a weak backdoor front that moves its way into central New England and just basically falls apart Tuesday night and Wednesday, and that's represented by that high that's in southeastern Canada. So we actually might get a little bit of a break in the temperatures here on Wednesday because of just a slight onshore flow, just enough maybe to knock a few degrees off, but we're going to go into the 90s, no doubt. And by the way, there's that representation of the GFS of Gordon sitting near New Orleans here tomorrow night. This is 2 a.m. Wednesday morning. And also, by the way, on the boundary between the upper high and the Canadian jet stream across the central and northern plains in the upper Midwest, you're going to see some heavy shower and thunderstorm activity going on over the next several days. Now, eventually, we do push a more significant cold front through here at the end of the week. So this comes through late Thursday. And yes, that is snow that you see there in the upper right corner up in Labrador. Okay, so for you cold weather, winter weather lovers, that's the direction we're moving in. The front that comes through stalls. The next high builds down to some degree, so we should see some cooling for Friday and Saturday. This looks a little bit stronger than what we went through this weekend. And then the front's going to come back as low pressure runs up to the Great Lakes. So we could wind up with some showers here, but perhaps enough dry air comes down to keep things reasonable. The frontal boundary, by the way, is going to be across Virginia and West Virginia. So those of you in the Mid-Atlantic states, in the interior Mid-Atlantic, back to the Blue Ridge Mountains, are you listening, Johnny Quest? You may have some more downpours and thunderstorms to deal with late this week and into the weekend. But of course, you've already gotten you're already above normal for the month of September. It's just amazing, astounding, the rain that's fallen there. And then that low runs up to the Great Lakes, and you get another cold front to come through here early next week. So, the GFS, for those of you who don't like the heat and humidity, is at least suggestive. If it's right about the short waves and the more active Canadian jet stream being further south, this will be the last of the hot and humid weather for a while, and maybe for, except unless we get the odd day or two here and there, maybe it's done for the most part. But the European would say no. The ridge in the east is going to be the more dominant player. I wish I knew what the answer was at this point. By the way, you can see the edge of Florence here, east of the North Carolina coast. The edge of this picture, by the way, is 63 degrees west, and here's Bermuda, where I've got the cursor. Bermuda at 32 and 64-ish. So it's east of Bermuda by about 100 or so miles on this particular run. We're not going to get an answer to our question at this stage at this stage of the game. So a lot of weather going on clearly, and we are going to be trying to resolve this puzzle in short order. So let me come back to you guys on the board here, and hang on one second. All right, so we can chat a little bit. I have a little bit of time before I have to go play on TV, so just give me 1 second here to set up a few things. Got a nice crowd on tonight. Thanks everybody for being here. Really, really appreciate it. I'm going to give everybody a collective hello because I see you guys on the chat. I feel terrible when it's like this because I know I'm going to wind up missing a few of you guys. So Eric Gordon, I hope I answered your question. Israel, I did put up the spaghetti plots, so I hope you're happy with that. Let's see. So Bill Gooden, the Atlantic has some catching up to do on the number of storms this year. Well, not really. I mean, we're up to the G storm. We're at an above average pace in terms of number of storms. And always remember, there's a difference between number of storms, intensity of storms, total storms versus how many storms make landfall. Okay, so they all give everybody different perceptions of what kind of hurricane season we have. If you go by the numbers so far, we are running above average. The fact that we haven't had any landfalls of hurricanes is a totally different issue. And that is not a surface low that you're seeing to the southwest of Gordon. It's just general troughing that's going on in the western Gulf of Mexico and back through West Texas. A tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico at the height of hurricane season that does not develop to a hurricane has got to be a rarity. Actually, it's not as rare as you think. If you go back, you'll find there's actually been there are quite a few where that has been the case. You don't always get the ideal conditions with regards to tropical storm development, and also with regards to full intensification to hurricane status. Isaiah Jacob, take another look at that 12Z Euro because it really wasn't that. I thought it was closer to the Florida coast, the central Florida coast, than anything else on the European. Again, that is the model's view. That is not a forecast. So just want to make that clear. Howard Vanderhoff, always doing well and always good to see you here. Shannon Culbreth, nice to see you on. Welcome. I think you're new here. I see the Atlantic Ocean becoming active. You saw what I put up with the European map. If you're still watching, 4 systems there that the European seems to pick up on. The GFS doesn't pick up on all 4, but it does show at least hints of something. Iron Mine 10, oil rig workers for sure are evacuated already. Yeah, they usually get those folks out fairly quickly and early. Let's see. We do have, by the way, there's good moisture feed also going into both Gordon and to Florence. Let's see. Just trying to get everybody. Pitbull, thanks for having our backs once again. It was on our anniversary when you got us through Hurricane Francis, like Gene, etc. You also got us through Irma last year. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for being here. Jason Schaefer, thanks, by the way, Jason, for signing up on Patreon. I really appreciate that. You're late to the party, but you got the posts over there that you can go back and look at. You got any questions, just shoot them to me, okay? Let's see. What is my gut telling me about these future tropical storms and their movements going forward? I got to tell you, right now my gut is sort of telling me that the GFS is overdoing those troughs in the east and that the European is going to be correct. Now that I've said that, the opposite's going to happen. But that's what my gut is telling me. Now, whether that... Where that ultimately winds up with, I don't know. Oh, Peter Bicker is on. Yes, Euro does the best with a higher resolution and graphics package than the GFS is. Nice to see you here on my YouTube channel, Peter. I hope you're going to behave yourself, okay? Jason, onshore flow give us greater heat index on Wednesday and the higher dew points. That's a good point. We'll wind up with temperatures a little lower on Wednesday, but the dew points are going to be just off the wall with the wind off the water. Yeah, the heat indices will still be around 100, and it'll still be disgustingly humid out there. J.S. Sweetie, we want the European to be gone to make this heat go away. I totally agree with you. Timothy Veltman can only hope the GFS is right and the heat is on its way out for the year. I hope so. I'm getting tired of it. Frogman, I think that, judging from what I'm seeing, it's going to come close to New Orleans, but it looks like it might go just a shade to the west, and that might mean that the heaviest rains will be a shade to the east. I keep getting myself confused. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. A shade to the east of New Orleans to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. That may be that some of that heavy rain will get into New Orleans, but I wonder how how far west that heavy rain, the heavy rains are going to extend. The CMC, the Canadian model, kind of splits the difference between the two, and that would increase the threat to say the Carolinas on northward, but it's so early and so speculative at this stage of the game. All solutions would be Israel. As far as Florence is concerned, it's still so far out in the long range that all solutions are out on the table. And rather than looking at the solutions, I think we need to focus on are the chess pieces that I talked about. The strength of the storm or lack thereof, the shearing with the upper low that's sitting out at 60 west. Is that going to happen and keep the system weak, which would favor a more westerly track? Is the troughing in southeastern Canada, and eventually that moves into the North Atlantic? Is the GFS correct on that, or is it going to be flatter like the Canadian, or non-existent and have a ridge in the east like the European does? Those I think are the important questions. So rather than focus on what the models are showing in terms of track, we need to focus on all the other things that are going on around it in order to figure where this is all going to wind up. So our puzzle will continue to move forward over the coming days. Now, let me just, real quick, because I got to wrap it up. I'm going to put a link up here, folks. It's to a new site. I've got all my website posts, videos going up there, and I'm going to be doing some special producing content. Specifically, Patreon is a place where you can, a lot of creative people go to, and you can become a patron and support what I do. And no one is under any obligation. I just put it out there. There's a couple of tiers, $2 a month, $5 a month, or whatever you would like. But that is the link for those of you who would like. Take a look at that. Also, an easy way to support my channel, if you shop on Amazon or use Ebates, you can shop on Amazon. I'm a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for this channel to earn fees linking to Amazon and affiliated sites. And the same goes with eBay, so you can get cash back on your purchases at retailers. They throw me back a little bit of coin, doesn't cost you a cent, and I can get a few cigars out of the deal. So just putting it out there. Thank you very much for those of you who have done that. Let me just remind you, I've got more on this. You can go to my website, meteorologistjoecioffi.com, to take a look at some of the stuff I've put up with regards to the tropical systems, as well as the day-to-day weather, so you can check that out. Also, tonight, roughly 9:15ish, you can look forward to my colleague Joe Rayo and I doing the Joe and Joe Weather Show. That will be on at Facebook at 9:15. It will then be uploaded to Patreon and also to YouTube later on this evening or tonight. I will try to get to it before 10 o'clock. Otherwise, it will have to be after 11:30. So I think I covered it all. Once again, if you've watched this, the maps that you see here are not to be used for decision making. Please go to the National Hurricane Center website, nhc.noaa.gov, or for official information, your local National Weather Service office, also for official information, or just your local officials themselves. They know your area far better than I. Okay, that's it, folks, for tonight. Thanks very much for being here. We'll see you later, hopefully on the Joe and Joe Weather Show. And if not, I'm sure I'll probably live stream at some point on Tuesday morning. So be ready for your notifications, by the way, when you get that. And if you're new to my YouTube channel, thank you very much for being here. And please do subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is absolutely free. We do live streams every day, and when there are storms going on, we do multiple live streams. Take care, folks. We'll either see you later or tomorrow.